Hey guys, it's Ndoplex and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about a very important topic, I feel, in the upcoming Borderlands 4 game, and that is going to be legendary drop rates. Or, I guess not just legendaries, we're talking legendaries, pearlescence if they've got them, effervescence if they've got them, even just uniques like blues and purples, but we'll touch on that sort of thing later. But the main premise of this video is to just talk about hopefully what we're going to get in Borderlands 4 and the pros and cons of what we've had in the previous games, such as Borderlands 2 and Borderlands 3, and to some extent Borderlands 1 and Wonderlands, but not as egregious. But just talk about some of the issues that we've had with our legendary or unique or pearlescent or whatever drop rates in the past games. So, first things first, let's talk about Borderlands 2. Now, Borderlands 2 has been my bread and butter. I played the game for ages. I love the game. It's probably, in fact, definitely my favourite game of the franchise and the one that I have the most hours on for sure. Now, I won't say that Borderlands 2 has the perfect system when it comes to drop rates, because the problem with Borderlands 2 is you could argue the drop rates are a little bit too low. Now, I know some of you straight away will be down in your keyboards typing away in the comments saying, what do you mean they're too low? Borderlands 2 is perfect drop rates, there's nothing wrong with it, it's supposed to be legendary, it's supposed to be a good feeling when you get it, and yes, I understand, and I personally agree with you. I agree with all these opinions. However, let's just take the general broad demographic of Borderlands. Now, I would say that maybe if we're being generous, about 25% of the entire, let's say, population that have played Borderlands 2. I would say maybe 25% have gone back and replayed the story. I would say most people who play these Borderlands games are going to play through them once. They'll play through them once, they might do other side quests, they might not. They'll play the game from start to finish and be done with it. And then maybe DLC drops in a year, and okay, let's come back, we'll do the DLC. We won't run through the main story again because we've already done that. Let's do the DLC, and then bang, done. I enjoyed the Borderlands game, but I'm done with it. That is what I would say about 75% of the player base does. Now, the other 25% is us super nerds who we complete Borderlands and then we go back and play the story again in TVHM, and we play the story again in UVHM. And we farm out each bosses to get the legendary drops, and we farm this and we farm that, and we spend endless hours in this game. Now, the problem for this is the largest demographic, this 75%, shall we call it, of our, let's call them casual players, are running through the game a single time. Now, Borderlands 2's legendary drop rate does vary a little bit, but generally it's about 10%. It's about a 10% chance to get specific legendary item from specific enemy. Let's say it's a 10% chance to get the fastball from Bol. Classic legendary weapon, it's a 10% chance to get the Unkempt Harold from Savage Lee. Now, the problem with this is, unless you farm this boss over and over again, you're probably only ever just going to kill him once for the side quest mission and then be done with it. And then move on. And that means you've only got a 10% chance to find this super special legendary weapon that they might drop. The issue with this, as you can probably see, is that means it's quite unlikely for the average player to maybe even see a single legendary when going through their entire playthrough. I know full well that my first legendary that I ever found in Borderlands 2 was not on my first playthrough. It was on my second playthrough, and I managed to get a pitchfork to drop out of a trash pile over in the dust. And that was the first legendary I ever saw, a random world drop. And world drops are way less than 10%. They're way less than 1%. They're super rare. But anyway, that was the first legendary I ever saw in Borderlands. And for me, it was a really special moment because, wow, there's this new rare weapon that I've never seen before. And anyway, it's a great feeling. But the point of these legendary weapons is they are generally quite interesting, very fun to use. A lot of different effects, good variety, make the game generally more interesting. They are legendary. And so, yes, you don't want them to be super common to drop, but it should not be as rare as that the general demographic is pretty much never going to see one throughout their entire Borderlands playthrough. They do one playthrough, the chances are relatively high that they just won't see a legendary weapon. And now, legendaries are not the be all and end all. They're not the only weapons that have this super special and interesting effects tied to them. You have unique quest rewards and quest rewards and stuff like that you get obviously from quests that have these special and unique effects on the weapons, interesting weapons, that sort of thing. But the legendaries are generally the bread and butter of everything and are where the true sort of value and fun with a lot of the weapons comes into it. So that's not to say without legendaries Borderlands is a boring game. It's definitely not. It's just the legendaries make the game better. And so when you've got your large population of players, our highest demographic of players, going through one playthrough and never seeing a legendary, that kind of sucks. And they might not realize it necessarily because they're there not just to experience the legendary weapons, but they're there to experience the story and blah blah and this and that, whatever. That's absolutely fine. But I think you should have an availability for legendaries so that the average player of your game is at the very least gonna see a few of them throughout their playthrough, even if they're not scattered everywhere like your greens and your whites and that sort of stuff, because that's the way it should be. So I would argue that Borderlands 2's legendaries are probably too rare for the general demographic of players. Then we get on to the next problem, which is Borderlands 3. And we go from a 1 in 10 drop rate on most things to almost guaranteed drop rates for legendaries. You kill a boss and 6 or 7 legendaries pop out. And now this I can see from the casual player standpoint. Wow, I've got all these cool shiny weapons that pop in and wow, it looks amazing. It's so fun seeing all the lights and you get to experience those new weapons. That's fantastic, but you become so littered and overburdened with legendaries that their meaning and the term legendary just doesn't really feel exciting anymore. In Borderlands 3, I don't know about you guys, but I get a legendary drop and I just think, whatever, there's 12 other legendaries that have dropped, who really cares? The issue with Borderlands 3 was, and this is anointments, but I'm not going to get into that, is I was never excited to see a legendary drop in Borderlands 3. I was excited to see a legendary drop that had the correct anointment, and that's just a whole different kettle of fish that I'm not going to get into. But essentially, Borderlands 3's legendaries were too overdone. I feel like Borderlands 4 needs to find a healthy middle ground between Borderlands 2's legendaries being a little bit too rare and Borderlands 3's just being utterly too common. Now, the problem comes in here is, me personally, I think Borderlands 2's drop rates are perfect. I think for this legendary weapon, you should have to work for it. You should have to farm a boss multiple times. I mean, the entire game is centered around these boss enemies respawning eventually. Let's not talk about Borderlands 3. But these boss enemies respawning and each enemy having a specific legendary tied to their loot pool. So I want to find the Hornet. The Hornet's a weapon that I want to go seek out now. I know to get that, I go to Knuckle Dragger. I kill Knuckle Dragger on average 10 times and I will have got my Hornet. That is a really good feeling. It's a really good feeling to want this specific thing, know where to get it and go and find it. That's great. The issue, again, with Borderlands 3, not so much nowadays. They have changed it a lot since its release, and they have made it so that you can get legendaries specifically tied to enemies' loot pools. But initially, legendaries were just random drops. Yes, they were more common from boss enemies, but there was very few enemies in the game that actually had specific legendaries tied to their loot pool. So you'd kill an enemy, and you'd just never know what legendary it was going to be. It would just drop a legendary, and it might be something good that you like, or it might be something not, and then you might want another one of these weapons, but you don't know where the hell to get it from because it just comes from random stuff. So the best way to just get legendaries in Borderlands 3 was to go find the biggest, ugliest boss you could, like, let's say, Grave Ward, who has a high chance of dropping legendaries, and just farm him, or just blanket farm him, kill him over and over again, and just hope that one of these legendaries that you wanted was going to drop. And to me, that just sucks. It takes away so much of what Borderlands is about, hunting these weapons, and it takes away the variety of being able to farm loads of different enemies. You just end up farming one guy because he has the best legendary drop rates. I don't know. It's just boring, and quite frankly, I didn't enjoy it nearly as much. But like we said before, for the general demographic of players, let's say the 75% of players, they saw way more legendaries in Borderlands 3, so they got to experience way more of these unique weapons, and I guess for them that made it a more fun experience. I have heard a lot of, I don't want to use the word too harshly, but casual players in Borderlands saying that they enjoyed 3 more than 2, and obviously Borderlands 3's story is absolute ass, we all know that, no one's trying to defend that, but I can understand where the defense comes from for these incredibly inflated legendary drops, because for the normal gamer who just plays through the game once, they still want to be able to see these legendary weapons. That's why they're in the game. That's why the weapons are legendary. They're exciting, they're different, they've got fun mechanics, they've got different ways of shooting. They shoot out saw blades, they shoot out bombs, they shoot out a massive variety of different stuff, which is interesting and fun. So you want to be able to use these, and maybe you haven't got enough time to sit and grind a boss for the next hour to get a legendary weapon. I get that. I understand it. So I really feel like Borderlands 4 needs to find this fine middle ground where we have drop rates that happen often enough to keep players engaged, to keep the general, more casual demographic engaged, but not too common, not spitting out 6 or 7 every time you get a kill, like in Borderlands 4, which is just going to put off your more hardcore players. You need to appeal to both demographics, and that is difficult. And I can see the position that Gearbox is in, where obviously you just want to appeal to the highest demographic of players, which is your 75% of players that are just going to play once. But those players that are just going to play once are, yes, maybe fans of the games, but not your true hardcore fans. And you can't always appeal to the hardcore fans because we're crazy sons of bitches and we just think it's fun to go farm the same thing over and over again. But you do also have to take us into account, because we're the idiots that are still playing your game 12 years, 15 years after it's been released. We're the ones still playing it. The other 75 have moved on. They're going to do different stuff. We're still here playing your game, making content for your game. So you have to, at least in some way, try and appease us as well. Now, that's pretty much all I have to say about legendaries. Honestly, I would probably say that Borderlands 1 did legendaries the best. I felt like, okay, maybe that's a bit untrue, but Borderlands 1, most of the time you'd see legendaries in Borderlands 1, you would end up seeing one in your first playthrough. However, it would normally be out of a chest, and while that's not necessarily a bad thing, I think in general the consensus is farming a specific boss for a legendary is more fun than farming a chest. Because farming a chest, you're just pressing a button, whether it be E or on console X or whatever. Open the chest. Nope. Let's quit out. Go back in. Do it again. Not really very fun. At least when you kill a boss, you get the engagement of killing a boss, fighting a fun boss to get his rewards. So the actual frequency of getting legendaries in Borderlands 1 was pretty good. Generally, you'd see a legendary within your first playthrough, and that's a good thing. And then if you go into subsequent playthroughs, these legendaries get more and more common, and you find a good amount of them. Now, when it comes to Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, Gearbox's most recent Borderlands-esque game, okay, excluding Tales from the Borderlands because that's just a totally different demographic, but Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, their legendary system was not terrible. I have gripes with it, but I do not think it was awful. It made legendaries a similar rarity to Borderlands 2 to begin with, and then as you progress through the game, you'd collect these legendary dice that you found throughout the game, and each one of these you picked up, it would increase your legendary drop chance by a certain percentage. And so the more that you explore the world and find these dice, the more it increases your drop rate, so the more likely you are to see legendaries. Now, unfortunately, we ran into a similar problem where there was a lot of legendaries that were just world drop legendaries, not specifically tied to enemies. There were some tied to specific enemies, but not that many. But a lot of them were tied to just world drops, and so then it felt like you had to just, if you wanted to get loads of legendaries, you'd go in, you'd run around and find all the dice, and then you'd just farm some bosses over and over again to get these mass drops of legendaries. So that was a problem. And then if you made a new character, initially, these lucky dice that you had didn't cross through different characters, so you'd have to go and find all those dice again, which finding those dice one time is pretty fun. Finding them again is getting tedious, and then God forbid if you create a third character, then it's just painful running through and finding all these dice again. They eventually changed that so that the dice were account wide, and this was good. But again, once you'd reached that end game and had got all those dice, your legendary drop rate was so overinflated. Like Borderlands 3, you're just seeing legendaries pop out everywhere, and not just from farming specific bosses, and they just didn't feel as legendary once again. And then anointment system, blah blah blah, not going to get into it. But Tiny Tina's Wonderlands did a decent job of it, and I think if maybe they upped the initial drop rate before you have any lucky dice, let's take out lucky dice. I didn't hate it for what Wonderlands was, but I don't think lucky dice is something that should be implemented in Borderlands 4 or a similar sort of system. I don't think it should. But the base drop rates in Wonderlands, a little bit higher than that, which is higher than Borderlands 2, lower than Borderlands 3, is gonna kind of be our sweet spot for legendaries. I think. I would love that. If they did that and then tied those legendary drops to specific enemies, maybe give enemies a chance of 2 different legendaries, that's absolutely fine. I don't mind that at all. Yes, it lowers our drop rate slightly, but you've got a chance to get one or the other. And for the casual player, they don't really care what they get. They just want to see a legendary pop out. That's cool. That's fun. Let's use this new weapon. So I think giving enemies multiple different loot sources is quite powerful. I think that's a good effect. I think it appeals to both the hardcore side of people who want to get this specific item. And so let's say if the enemy has 2 different weapons, both at a 10% drop rate, our casual player has now got a 1 in 5 chance of getting the exact legendary that they want, which is great because 1 in 5 times they kill this boss, which is a lot more often obviously than 1 in 10, they're going to get a legendary weapon. Whether it be the one they want or not, that doesn't matter. However, now if we go to our harder core side of the player base that want this specific weapon to drop, they now have a 1 in 20 chance, because you've got a 1 in 10 for it to be the right one, or you've got a 1 in 10 for it to be the other one. So technically it's a 1 in 20, which is obviously a much rarer chance to get the specific thing that you want. But you're seeing more legendaries, and so that can't be a bad thing in my opinion. Now, when it comes to our next rarity up, we have pearlescent items, and they were in Borderlands 1 and then again added in Borderlands 2, and then they have never been used again, and I have no idea why. When Borderlands 3 came out, Randy Pitchford said some absolute spiel jargon about how we can't implement pearlescence because that would take away from what we already have. We don't have the resources to do it. It's total shit in my opinion. We've had mods out there that have created pearlescent weapons that have drops. I'm not a modder, I'm not a developer, I don't know how difficult it is, but I know full well that is not the constraint. There was other decisions made behind the lines that they decided not to add it in, and I think that is an absolutely ridiculous decision. Because for our casual demographic, they maybe don't even know that pearlescence exists, and that's fine. And the occasional person will find one, and that's going to be a cool thing for them to find. But for our hardcore demographic, I think that pearlescence have to be super rare. I liked how they did it more in Borderlands 1 than I do in Borderlands 2. The pearlescence should drop from the hardest to kill enemies. We're talking endgame enemies, either raid bosses or super difficult encounters, something like that. They should have a chance to drop from those things, and should be a very low chance to drop. We do not need 1 in 10 legendaries. We need like 1 in 100. We need like 1 in 100 for these pearlescent items. They have to be rare. They have to be difficult to get hold of, which gives them the warranty of this pearlescent rating. Now, the problem in Borderlands 2, and 1 to an extent, is the pearlescents were ass. They just like sucked, which is crazy to me how you've got this super rare weapon that is so difficult to find, and then when you get hold of it, it's kind of just shit. Doesn't make any sense to me. But yeah, in Borderlands 1, it was farmed from Cormorax, which was good, but only Cormorax. And then the other way was opening chests in the armory. Now, arguably, opening the chests is slightly quicker than Cormorax, but I mean, who wants to just run around opening chests? So much more boring. I don't mind them being in chests, but for your only options to be Cormorax or chests, it just seems stupid to me. But regardless, then we move on to Borderlands 2, which is our only other game that has had these pearlescent items. And now your pearlescent are tied to super rare world drops. Now, legendary world drops are rare in themselves. To get a pearl is just almost unthinkable. It just doesn't happen. You can only get these off loot midgets above the level of 61. Now, again, this is super endgame stuff, but loot midgets are such a small demographic of the whole Borderlands like enemy system. They're such a small part of it, and so tying them to this one enemy that has, the only reason you see them more of loot midgets is because they have a higher chance to drop legendaries, and the chance for a legendary to be a pearl is obviously higher, so coincidentally your loot midgets have the highest chance to drop a pearl. The only other enemies is tubbies, and I again don't think tubbies are a bad thing to drop pearls. Tubbies are rare enemies, difficult enemies to kill, that's good, big thumbs up there, but to have these as our pretty much only reliable ways to get pearls sucks. Why don't we tie some of our pearlescent drops to, I don't know, the multitude of raid bosses you have in Borderlands 2. You've got Terramorphous, you've got Vermivorous, you've got Voracidus, you've got Deciduous. There are so many different raid bosses. Pyro P, Master Yi, loads of different raid bosses. Why don't we tie our super rare pearlescents to some of these raid bosses rather than just tying them to farming loot midgets over and over again? Or the even narrower pool, the second gen pearlescents, can only be dropped from tubbies over level 61. And it's like, why are we doing this? Now I need to, the best way to farm tubbies or to farm pearlescents now is to run into a map in the new DLC, the Fight for St. Lilith DLC. I think it's like Mount Scour Research Center or something, I can't remember. You run through there, you run across a little train track, and you've progressed a side quest to a certain point where some elemental spider ants jump out. And now, because these spider ants are elemental, they have a 1 in 10 chance to be a tubby. 4 of them jump out, so you've basically got like a 4 in 10 chance for 1 of them to be a tubby. If it's a tubby, you kill it, and then you've got, let's say, a 1 in 20 chance for that to be a pearl. That sucks. All I'm doing is running forward to see if a spider ant's a chubby one. If it's not, I'm safe quitting another mallet there. And if it is, I still have a very low chance of getting a pearl, which is fine. I like there being a low chance to get a pearl, but I don't like it just being tied to this single chubby enemy. So, how do we fix this? We tie the pearlescents to be still super rare. I think the drop rate of them in Borderlands 2 is good. I think it feels really fun and unique when you get this pearlescent weapon because it's so rare. But we need to tie it to raid boss encounters. We've got the Maliwan takedown in Borderlands 3. Put a pearlescent loot pool, maybe 1, maybe 2. At the end, after killing Wotan, you've done 25 minutes, let's say, of a really difficult dungeon. You've done it on the hardest difficulty, so you've got the highest chance for pearlescents to drop. And when it does, it's going to be such a great feeling. It's like you've killed this really hard raid boss, done this encounter, and now you've got this really unique and rare weapon. And make the unique and rare weapons good. Make them powerful. Make them feel worthy of the name pearlescent. And I think if you do that, we will be in a really good spot for Borderlands 4 in terms of our weapons drop rates. I haven't really spoken much about rare weapons. I think more rare weapons, by rare I mean blue, and by these I mean unique quest reward weapons, normally tied to in Borderlands 2, with a red text on them. I think we should have more of these, not only tied to quest rewards, but also tied to enemy drops as well. I like it. I like in Borderlands 2 when I'm farming, let's say, the creepers in the caustic caverns, and they drop the blockhead. That's great. I like it. It's fun. It doesn't have to be a legendary weapon to be an interesting and unique weapon, but I think the unique weapon should be competitive with other legendary weapons, because this is another problem in Borderlands 3, and I know I'm sidetracking here, but in Borderlands 3, there was pretty much no other weapons to use except for legendary weapons. Legendary weapons were so common, you would almost always have an entire inventory full of them. So you would only ever use legendary weapons. And it just takes away from so many other aspects of Borderlands itself. Borderlands is known for having so many. They always advertise it. We've got 13 bazillion guns in the game now. That's amazing. Good job, Gearbox. That's great. But when you have 300 legendaries, and you just see these legendaries drop all the time, and the legendaries are the best versions, and they should be. Legendaries should be the best versions of weapons, well, excluding pearlescents, but that's whatever. They should be the best, but we shouldn't have so many of them that my entire inventory is just stock full of legendaries all the time. It's dumb. It's stupid. That other 12 gazillion 999 whatever, minus 300, other weapons in the game are totally useless, because although you see them all the time, you're never ever going to use one because you've always got that legendary weapon in your backpack ready to use. So it's just stupid in my opinion. I liked in Borderlands 2 being able to use greens, being able to work my way from white to green. You find a blue feels great to use because it's slightly better than a white and a green, and then you find a purple, and there are some really good purples, and then you get a unique weapon that drops as a blue, like the Heartbreaker. What an amazing weapon. You get the Ruby. What an amazing weapon. The Blockheads, the Pimpernel, the Sandhawk. So many amazing unique blue rarity weapons that are on equal power, if not exceed the power of a lot of legendary items, and that's great. It just adds more variety, more color into our inventory, not just a blanket shiny orange color of the legendaries like it was in Borderlands 3. So I think please add more of these unique weapons. They had unique weapons in Borderlands 3 quest rewards. They are all shit. There is not a single unique reward in Borderlands 3 that is any good. I stand on this hill and I will die on this hill. The only one that was ever good was a porcelain pipe bomb, and that was because it was busted and needed a nerf. Every single other unique weapon in Borderlands 3, quest reward wise, that isn't a legendary, is just absolute trash and not even worth using. And what does this do? It makes me think, no point doing any side quests. I played the game once. I'm not going to bother doing side quests next time around because there are no good rewards that I get from doing side quests ever. So that means that my playthrough of Borderlands 3 becomes, I've done the side quest once, that was great first time around, the reward is shit, there's no point in me ever doing that again, so I'm just going to run through the main story, run to TVHM, run to UVHM, not that they had that in Borderlands 3, but you know what I mean, get to Mayhem 10, get the highest chance for legendaries to drop, and then just go farm the big boss for a bunch of legendaries to drop. And then that's how I set my build up. That sucks. That's so ass. It's so boring. It just means that every single playthrough of Borderlands 3 is going to be exactly the same, because you're never going to want to run off and do any side quests anymore, because they all drop shit unique weapons, and what's the point in doing it? You've already done it once. You've already experienced the interestingness of what the side quest is, and now the reward is shit, so there's no point ever doing it again. I think that's stupid. I think you should have good weapons, good, unique, rare, maybe even legendary weapons tied to side quests, which incentivizes people to go out and farm these side quests to get, well, not farm them, but do them in another playthrough so that you can get these weapons. Then we roll on to another issue, which is our farming for these weapons that get dropped from side quests. If you're in Borderlands 2, you can do read-only farming, and you can do that in 3 as well, but there definitely needs to be some sort of system for us hardcore players that allows you to re-roll the parts on your weapons for maybe just some money, not an extortionate amount of money, but maybe a little bit just to get those small percentile increases, but maybe have this feature only available in UVHM so that it can't be abused in the early game, and for, like I say, our largest 75% demographic, it's just going to be another system on top of a lot of systems we've got already that's going to make the game more confusing. So just cancel it out. We've already established that 75% of our players do not make it to TVHM or whatever, so to speak. So just section that off so that you can only reroll weapons from quest rewards in TVHM. I don't see what the problem with that is. I can't think of a problem off the top of my head of what that would be. But I think in general, I have probably now ranted for long enough. I think those are all of my thoughts on legendary drop rates, pearlescent drop rates, unique weapon drop rates in Borderlands 2, 3, and what I would like to see in Borderlands 4. I hope we see a lot of this stuff that I've talked about in Borderlands 4. I hope they get it right. It doesn't have to be perfect off the bat, but it needs to be workable, and it needs to be a system that allows the interactability for our largest demographic of casual players, but also a rewarding system for our smaller demographic of more hardcore players. And I think there's ways around it. I think I've explained plenty of ways to incorporate these designs and ideas into the game, and I just can't understand why we haven't had this so far in any of the Borderlands games. We've never got it right. We've improved on Borderlands games, and then we've gone back on certain functions and then improved in other ways. The game should just be constantly improving. I don't know how to say it. you take all of the negative comments from what was wrong with Borderlands 2 and you make them better in Borderlands 3. This excludes story and stuff like that and whatever developments. Like I say, I'm not a game dev or anything like that, but all of these little issues like this, all these fundamental issues, they should not be issues when it comes to the next generation of games. And I'm going to be really disappointed if I get to Borderlands 4 and I see these same kind of issues persisting. That's about all I got to say. Let me know what you guys think about what I've said in this video, whether you agree with me about the drop rates, whether you think that they should be higher than Borderlands 3. Let's just go crazy. Let's drop legendaries out of everything's ass all the time. Why the heck not? Or whether you think, nah, fuck the casuals. We need some hardcore Borderlands game. Get rid of them entirely. Make it so I've got to kill this boss 100 times before anything drops. I want that legendary to feel legendary. I don't know about you guys, but those are my thoughts on the situation. Give us a like, maybe drop us a sub, and thank you very much for watching this lengthy breakdown discussion in Borderlands. I look forward to Borderlands 4. I'm really excited. I was excited for the gameplay trailer, and I'm looking forward to what's to come. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.